Carl Jung's most unsettling revelation wasn't about psychosis, depression, or anxiety. It was about an invisible burden carried by a rare kind of person. These are individuals who possess a kind of sight so penetrating it disrupts their entire lives. Jung called it differentiated perception, and he considered it one of the most psychologically dangerous discoveries of his entire career. Why? Because those who see what others cannot often suffer, not from mental illness, but from social and psychological alienation brought on by their exceptional awareness. These individuals aren't just sensitive in the traditional sense. They can read micro-expressions, feel unspoken emotional undercurrents, and sense when someone's words don't match their energy. They pick up on unconscious tensions in a room before anyone says a word. They know when someone is lying, even without any tangible evidence. They feel the anxiety beneath a smile, the grief beneath a calm tone, and the anger wrapped in politeness. Jung called this form of perception differentiated because it transcends typical social or emotional intelligence. It pierces into the unconscious realms of other people's psyches. At first glance, such an ability might sound like a gift, but Jung quickly realized this wasn't the case. These individuals, rather than being celebrated for their insight, often ended up deeply isolated. Their lives followed an eerily similar pattern: intense emotional burnout, social rejection, chronic loneliness, and a haunting sense of disconnection from the world. It wasn't because they were inherently broken. It was because society has no space for people who see beneath the surface. Jung found that these individuals struggled to form friendships or keep jobs, not because they lacked skills, but because their very presence revealed too much. They unknowingly exposed the emotional agreements people make to function: polite fictions, suppressed pain, hidden motives. Just by being themselves, they disrupted the unspoken rules that hold social groups together. The most powerful case Jung documented occurred in 1913, during the peak of his own psychological crisis following his break with Freud. A young woman came to him, an introverted intuitive, unlike any patient he'd seen before. She possessed what he later called undifferentiated intuitive perception. She could walk into a room and, within moments, detect who was suffering, who was hiding secrets, who was emotionally blocked. Her intuition didn't just border on psychic, it felt intrusive, even to her. She hated that she couldn't turn it off. Conversations felt artificial. Relationships felt emotionally unsafe, and workplaces were unbearable. Jung wrote of her, "The patient displays an extraordinary capacity for perceiving unconscious contents in others, but this faculty appears to cause her considerable distress rather than advantage." She wasn't delusional. In fact, her insights about others were remarkably accurate, and Jung personally validated them. But her perception was so advanced, it became socially hazardous. What made this woman's case so alarming to Jung wasn't just the accuracy of her perceptions, it was the cost of bearing them. She could perceive unconscious content in others with uncanny precision, but it wasn't a gift that enhanced her life. On the contrary, it left her socially isolated, emotionally overstimulated, and existentially confused. Jung realized that she wasn't sick in the conventional sense. Her suffering didn't stem from delusion or emotional instability, but from clarity so profound that it threatened her ability to live among others. In his words, she wasn't insane, she was overconscious. This was when Jung began exploring what he would later call participation mystique, a concept borrowed from anthropological thought, but adapted to explain how certain individuals psychologically merge with their surroundings. These people unconsciously absorb not only the emotions of others, but the entire unconscious field of a space. It's like breathing in an emotional fog. No one else notices, and doing so all the time, with no off switch. They can't shield themselves from what others are unwilling to face, and it often overwhelms their inner world. This perceptual sensitivity isn't limited to emotion. Jung noticed that many of his patients, particularly introverted intuitives, could detect broader psychological patterns long before they became visible to others. They could intuitively sense relationship failures before signs of tension emerged, detect when someone was lying even without verbal cues, and foresee breakdowns or shifts in group dynamics that would later erupt. They weren't making guesses, they were reading deep, unconscious realities. One modern researcher who validated aspects of Jung's theory is Dr. Elaine Aron, who popularized the term highly sensitive person, HSP. Her studies suggest that approximately 20% of people are more attuned to subtle stimuli both emotionally and environmentally. But Jung noticed something even more selective. A narrow band of individuals, about 1% of the population, who exhibited what he called differentiated intuitive function. These individuals didn't just feel things deeply. They understood unconscious content with shocking clarity. These people can walk into a group and sense unresolved traumas hiding beneath humor. They perceive the shadow, Jung's term for repressed or denied parts of the psyche, lurking behind someone's confidence or politeness. They know, without needing to be told, who is secretly insecure, who is emotionally collapsed, who is spiritually bankrupt. And worst of all, they often feel these things as if they were their own emotions. Jung wrote, "The danger lies not in the perception itself, but in the psychic isolation it creates." These individuals frequently become scapegoats because they unintentionally reflect truths others are not ready to face. Instead of being thanked for their insight, they're blamed for being negative, making things up, or ruining the mood. The deeper truth, their presence simply disrupts the collective denial necessary for social cohesion. And that disruption doesn't go unpunished. It creates what Jung termed the problem of the superior function, when the very ability that allows someone to see clearly becomes the reason they are socially rejected, emotionally misunderstood, and even psychologically attacked. Their insight becomes too much for the people around them to handle. Jung's clinical observations led him to a profound insight. People with highly differentiated perception weren't just seeing more, they were feeling more, and often carrying the emotional burdens of others as if they were their own. This psychological absorption created a state of deep confusion. Where did their own feelings end and other people's begin? Many of these individuals couldn't answer that question. Jung realized that what they were experiencing wasn't madness, but a form of empathic entanglement, a dangerous blending of boundaries between self and other. To understand and categorize the patterns he observed, Jung began to define different subtypes within this introverted, intuitive population. Each type represented a unique way that unconscious content was processed, absorbed, and manifested. He eventually identified 4 distinct forms of differentiated perception. These weren't just personality quirks. They were deep psychological blueprints with real-world consequences. The first type he identified was the feeling intuitive. These individuals didn't just sense what others were going through. They felt it in their own bodies. Joy, grief, rage, shame, all of it coursed through them as if it were their own experience. Jung described them as living in a constant state of emotional contagion, where other people's unlived or unacknowledged feelings flowed directly into their nervous systems. They were emotional sponges, often overwhelmed by environments others found manageable. One patient reported needing to leave social gatherings early because her body would begin shaking from the emotional noise of the room. The second was the thinking intuitive. These individuals exhibited extraordinary analytical clarity about the unconscious motivations and patterns in others. They could predict the collapse of relationships, the failure of business ventures, or the personal crisis of a friend, not through logic or data, but through pattern recognition on a subconscious level. Jung noted that they often found themselves accused of being pessimists or troublemakers, simply for pointing out inevitable outcomes that no one else could yet see. Their clarity wasn't welcomed, it was feared. The third type was the sensation intuitive, those who experienced unconscious content through their bodies in a more physical way. They could sense when someone was sick before symptoms appeared, or feel when someone was lying through a sudden pain in their chest. Jung described these people as early warning systems for both emotional and physical dysfunction. They were often drawn to healing professions, but suffered greatly if they didn't learn to create energetic boundaries. Finally, Jung identified the pure intuitive. These individuals had no clearly defined auxiliary function, no filter. They saw and felt everything, while their insights were profound. Their inner worlds were often chaotic. They struggled to organize their perceptions into coherent thoughts or actions. Jung wrote that these people lived in a state of perpetual overwhelm, flooded by unconscious input they couldn't process or express. Without proper psychological tools, they risked falling into despair, dissociation, or isolation. Understanding which type of perception you possess is critical. Each requires different strategies for what Jung called integration, the ability to channel unconscious insight without being consumed by it. Jung emphasized that it wasn't enough to simply possess superior perception. Without integration, this perception would wreak havoc internally and externally. To Jung, the problem wasn't the perception itself, but the lack of psychological structure to hold it. Seeing deeply into others without the inner tools to process, filter, or apply that insight responsibly often led to emotional collapse or identity loss. He believed that integration was not just a personal challenge, but a psychological necessity. That's why he developed what became known as the individuation process, a lifelong journey to maintain a stable sense of self while engaging with unconscious material. It was a path from psychological overwhelm to wisdom, from isolation to conscious participation. He broke this journey down into 3 key phases, each one essential to survival and transformation for the highly perceptive. The first phase was recognition and differentiation. Here, the goal is to identify when one is absorbing emotional material that doesn't belong to them. Jung called this conscious discrimination. It's the ability to ask, is this feeling mine, or did I absorb it from someone else? Without this skill, individuals with heightened perception become emotional dumping grounds, carrying grief, anger, and confusion that isn't theirs to carry. To support this recognition, Jung instructed patients to spend deliberate time in solitude, not to isolate themselves, but to allow emotional and psychic residue to settle. In stillness, they could begin to sort through what belonged to them versus what was inherited from their environment. He believed this phase was the foundation of psychological self-definition. Without it, no real integration could occur. The second phase was shadow integration. Jung observed that many individuals who see others' darkness with great clarity are often blind to their own. They externalize the shadows, seeing everyone else's flaws, while denying their own capacity for deception, cruelty, or selfishness. This creates distortion. Jung warned that unless these individuals actively integrate their own shadow, their perception of others becomes reactive and moralistic, rather than healing. To integrate the shadow means to accept one's full humanity, not just the noble or gifted parts. Jung wrote, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves." This phase involves self-confrontation, not judgment, but honest reflection. The goal is not to reduce perception, but to temper it with humility. The third phase was conscious participation. This is where the real transformation begins. After recognizing what belongs to them and integrating their own shadow, highly perceptive individuals can begin engaging with others without losing themselves. Jung described this as the development of a psychological container, an internal capacity to hold others' unconscious material temporarily, without absorbing or identifying with it. At this level, perception becomes a tool, not a burden. Individuals learn to sense deeply without reacting impulsively. They can speak difficult truths with compassion rather than confrontation. Their presence becomes grounding rather than disruptive. Jung described this as the movement from wounding mirror to healing mirror, from being a threat to becoming a guide. But Jung's most unsettling realization came when he explored what happens when this integration doesn't occur. Through decades of clinical experience, he observed that individuals with superior perception who failed to develop the necessary internal structure often faced 3 core psychological dangers. Threats not only to their relationships, but to their very sense of identity. Danger 1. Collective unconscious disruption. Jung noted that people who perceive unconscious truth threaten the delicate illusions that hold social groups together. Most communities, whether families, workplaces, or nations, are built on unspoken agreements about what will be seen and what must remain unseen. When someone sees through those agreements, even unintentionally, they become a destabilizing presence. Jung wrote, "The individual who perceives too clearly threatens the collective agreements upon which social cohesion depends." These individuals are often scapegoated, pushed out, or made to feel as if they are the problem, when in truth, they are merely reflecting the problem that already exists. Danger 2. Psychological isolation. Superior perception often leads to a kind of existential loneliness. Jung referred to it as the curse of consciousness, writing, "Consciousness cannot be shared with those who do not possess it." This doesn't mean intellectual superiority. It means perceptual sensitivity. The more someone sees beneath surface appearances, the harder it is to find others who speak the same inner language. Many of Jung's patients reported feeling like they were living in a different reality than those around them. Their insights were dismissed, their depth misunderstood, their presence avoided. This kind of isolation isn't just social, it's spiritual. It creates a sense of disconnection from humanity, and worse, from oneself. Jung saw this as one of the greatest dangers facing those with differentiated perception, the risk of concluding that their truth has no place in the world, that they must suppress what they see in order to survive. But suppression doesn't lead to peace, it leads to inner collapse. Danger 3. Identity dissolution. Perhaps the most severe threat Jung observed was the loss of personal identity. When someone is constantly absorbing the unconscious material of others, they may begin to lose contact with their own authentic self. Their inner life becomes so entangled with the emotional currents around them that they can no longer hear their own voice. Jung called this state participation mystique, a collapse of psychic boundaries in which the individual merges with the collective unconscious. He warned that this danger was not merely metaphorical, but a real psychological risk. The danger is not merely social exile, but psychological annihilation. The complete loss of individual identity in favor of collective possession. Without the tools of individuation, the variability that makes someone extraordinary can become the force that erases them. That's why Jung insisted on the importance of conscious development. Superior perception, when unintegrated, leads to personal ruin. But when integrated through individuation, it becomes a force for healing both personally and collectively. To illustrate the immense psychological stakes of unintegrated versus integrated perception, Jung turned to examples from both history and his personal experience. He believed that certain individuals throughout time embodied the struggle with differentiated perception. Some crushed by it, others transformed through it. These cases, he argued, served as archetypes for anyone attempting to navigate the challenges of superior awareness in an unconscious world. One such case was the German philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche. Jung saw Nietzsche as someone with exceptional intuitive perception, capable of piercing through cultural illusions and exposing the hidden, emotional scaffolding of civilization. Nietzsche questioned religious dogma, challenged moral conventions, and confronted the nihilism underlying modern life. But despite or perhaps because of his insights, he descended into madness. Jung believed that Nietzsche's tragic collapse wasn't merely due to mental illness. It was the result of unintegrated perception. He saw too much, too fast, and lacked the internal scaffolding to contain or channel it. Jung observed that Nietzsche became identified with his superior function, the razor-sharp intellect and radical vision, rather than developing a broader psychological foundation. This identification with his insights made him vulnerable to inflation, a psychological condition where one begins to equate oneself with absolute truth or divine insight. Jung wrote, "The danger is that the ego identifies with the archetype, leading to an inflation that cuts the individual off from human relationships." Nietzsche's perception became a weapon, and tragically, he turned it against the very world he sought to awaken. Instead of transformation, there was fragmentation. In contrast, Jung pointed to Meister Eckhart, a 13th century mystic, as an example of successful integration. Eckhart, too, had deep mystical and psychological insight, but rather than becoming isolated or adversarial, he used his vision to serve. His sermons, while profound, were infused with humility. He spoke not as one who condemned the unconscious world, but as someone who guided others towards self-realization. Jung admired how Eckhart offered wisdom without alienation, clarity without judgment. Jung wrote, "Eckhart transformed his superior perception into wisdom that could nourish others without overwhelming them." This was the essence of what Jung called conscious humility, a state where one does not deny their perception, but does not become consumed by it either. The gift is honored, but not idolized. It is used to heal, not dominate. Perhaps the most compelling case study, however, was Jung himself. Between 1913 and 1919, he entered what he termed his confrontation with the unconscious. During this time, he experienced intense visions, symbolic dreams, and psychological upheavals that could have easily been labeled psychotic. But Jung chose to engage with these experiences consciously. He recorded them in what would later become the Red Book, using drawing, mythological exploration, and reflection to create structure around the chaos. This was his individuation process in action, learning to hold the unconscious without being swallowed by it. He wrote, "I was menaced by a psychosis and was saved only by my ability to understand what was happening to me." His saving grace was his relationship to his perception. He didn't reject it, but he also didn't merge with it. Instead, he worked to contain, interpret, and integrate what he saw, turning danger into discovery. Jung understood that those with differentiated perception could not afford to walk through life blindly. They needed a specific kind of relational support system, one capable of handling the emotional and psychological intensity they naturally bring into any interaction. Without such support, their development would be stunted, and their insights would either be suppressed or explode outward in destructive ways. To address this, Jung identified 3 essential types of relationships that were crucial for highly perceptive individuals to thrive. These weren't casual friendships or surface-level social bonds. They were psychologically attuned relationships anchored in mutual respect, emotional safety, and conscious participation. Type 1. Fellow individuated persons. Jung believed that when two people have both gone through the individuation process, facing and integrating their own unconscious, they can recognize one another immediately. He called this phenomenon the conscious minority. These relationships feel different from the start. There's a sense of being seen without fear, known without judgment. Jung wrote, "The individuated person recognizes another individuated person instantly. There is a quality of presence that cannot be faked." In these rare connections, the perceptive individual is no longer too much. They are home. Type 2. Those actively engaged in individuation. These are people who may not yet have fully integrated their unconscious, but are actively doing the work. They're in therapy, journaling, engaging in spiritual practice, or self-inquiry. They might not have the same level of perception, but they value it. They are less likely to be defensive when uncomfortable truths emerge, because they understand the discomfort as part of growth. Jung noted that these individuals are capable of holding space without projecting their shadows, and they can serve as valuable allies in the perceptive person's journey. Type 3. Natural containers. These people may not be deeply introspective or even aware of Jungian ideas, but they have a natural capacity to remain grounded in the presence of emotional or psychological intensity. Often, they are older individuals who have weathered life's storms and developed inner steadiness. They may not fully understand the perceptive individual's inner workings, but they don't feel threatened by them. Jung called them natural psychological containers, people who can absorb intensity without destabilizing. Their value lies in their emotional resilience and grounding energy. To help his patients determine whether a person was safe to open up to, Jung developed what he called the recognition process, a method for slowly revealing one's perceptual depth in stages. First, offer a small observation and watch the response. Are they curious or defensive? Do they reflect or deflect? Second, note how they handle feedback and contradiction. Can they tolerate ambiguity? Third, observe their emotional regulation. Do they stay centered, or do they react with fear or hostility? Jung emphasized that perception should be revealed gradually and strategically, never all at once. The goal is not to be fully seen by everyone, he wrote, but to be seen wisely by a few. This process isn't about hiding, but about protecting the perceptive function from unnecessary trauma. When perception is shared with care, it becomes a bridge rather than a burden. Once a perceptive individual finds a safe relational environment, the question becomes not just who to share their insights with, but how. Jung developed what he referred to as a gradual revelation protocol, a conscious method for navigating social reality without overwhelming others or sabotaging oneself. It begins with discernment. Not everyone is ready to hear the truth, even if they desperately need it. Jung stressed the importance of delivering insights as invitations, not pronouncements. The first step is to make gentle, surface-level observations and observe the other person's reaction. Do they become defensive, brush it off, or respond with genuine curiosity? If the person responds with openness, that's a green light to go slightly deeper. If they shut down or shift the conversation, it's a sign to pull back. Perception should be a two-way process if it's not met with respect or emotional maturity. It's not worth offering further. Jung wrote, "Never force consciousness upon someone. It must be invited, or it will be rejected violently." The second step is to assess psychological mindedness. Does the other person reflect on themselves, acknowledge their contradictions, or seek personal growth? These signs indicate whether someone can engage with perception in a constructive way. The third step is to determine the level of emotional stability. Perceptive insights can destabilize people who are already psychologically fragile or heavily defended. Jung advised, offer insight like a seed, not a sword. These social strategies were not manipulative. They were protective. Jung believed that superior perception should never be used as a tool of ego or control. When someone uses their insights to dominate or judge others, they fall into what he called the inflation trap, a psychological state in which the ego fuses with the superior function, believing itself above others. This, Jung warned, was a sure path to alienation and internal collapse. In fact, he outlined several common pitfalls that can derail a perceptive person's individuation journey. The first, as mentioned, is psychological inflation, believing that one's ability to perceive gives them the right to correct or enlighten everyone. This often leads to social rejection and internal loneliness. Jung cautioned that the moment someone begins to feel like the only one who sees clearly, they may be losing touch with reality and falling into unconscious arrogance. The second pitfall is withdrawal justified by superiority. Some individuals become so disillusioned by society's unconsciousness that they isolate completely, convincing themselves that others are too shallow or broken to relate to. Jung saw this not as wisdom, but as a form of defensive superiority, a disguised wound. The hermit who withdraws from life has not transcended it, he wrote, but has been defeated by it. The third trap is self-erasure through helping. Some perceptive people become addicted to being needed. They feel valuable only when offering guidance or emotional labor. Over time, they lose touch with their own needs and identity. Jung warned that when perception becomes identity, the self disappears behind the role of the helper. This is not individuation, he wrote, but its opposite, the sacrifice of personality to function. Each of these pitfalls stems from a lack of balance. Perception alone is not enough. It must be rooted in a conscious, evolving relationship with both self and other. Only then can the gift fulfill its purpose, not as a weight, but as a way forward. Integration, Jung taught, is not a one-time achievement. It is a living process, constantly tested by life's unpredictability. Even those who have done years of inner work may regress when faced with trauma, loss, or profound transition. During these times, highly perceptive individuals are particularly vulnerable to slipping back into patterns of overwhelm, absorbing unconscious material from others, losing boundaries, and mistaking collective pain for personal failure. To counteract this, Jung emphasized the importance of maintenance practices, ongoing rituals and disciplines that preserve psychological clarity. First and foremost is the cultivation of regular solitude. This isn't about social isolation. It's about creating a space to return to oneself. In solitude, the perceptive individual can filter out the noise and re-establish the boundary between internal experience and absorbed content. Jung believed that solitude wasn't optional for these individuals. It was medicine. Another crucial practice is creative expression. Writing, painting, music, or any form of symbolic output allows unconscious content to move through the psyche without getting stuck. Jung himself relied on art and active imagination during his Red Book years, using symbolic imagery to process visions that might otherwise have broken him. He encouraged perceptive individuals to develop their own creative languages, not for perfection, but for release. Ongoing shadow work is also vital. Even after integration begins, the shadow doesn't disappear, it evolves. Jung warned that if we stop examining ourselves, we risk projecting once again, seeing in others what we refuse to admit in ourselves. For the perceptive individual, unchecked shadow projection is particularly dangerous because of the influence their words can carry. When you see deeply, your judgments cut deeper too. That's why humility must accompany every insight. Connection is another pillar of integration. Perceptive individuals need reality checks. People who can lovingly challenge their assumptions and hold them accountable. These connections prevent drift into ego inflation or spiritual superiority. Jung believed in the necessity of what he called the few who understand. They are not many, but they are essential. Even one such connection can prevent psychic fragmentation. And then there's the ultimate evolution, using perception in service. Jung called this conscious participation, not just surviving with perception, but engaging the world on behalf of consciousness itself. The goal is not to be admired for what you see, but to become a bridge, a vessel through which unconscious material can be brought into awareness for the benefit of the collective. This is what Jung meant when he referred to perceptive individuals as culture carriers. They aren't here to fit in. They're here to lead humanity toward greater self-awareness, not through force, but through embodiment, through presence, through wisdom born of integration. At the highest level of development, Jung observed what he called the transcendent function. This is when an individual can see without needing to be seen, can know without needing to explain, and can hold perception with a light hand rather than a heavy heart. The perceptive function no longer demands validation. It becomes quiet, stable, and effective. In this stage, the danger of seeing everything doesn't disappear, but it transforms. The burden becomes a gift, not just for the individual, but for the world. Jung's ultimate message was clear. Superior perception is not a curse. Unconsciousness about it is. Those who see what others cannot are not broken or defective. They are, as he described, consciousness pioneers, individuals who are evolutionarily ahead of their time. Their job isn't to silence their perception or suppress their gifts, but to learn how to carry them wisely so they can serve as bridges between what is and what is possible. You weren't born to suffer in silence with this gift. You were born to grow into it, to integrate it, and eventually to offer it back to the world as wisdom. Jung's individuation process provides the roadmap, but the journey must be walked step by step, insight by insight. And as you walk it, remember, the world doesn't need less of your perception. It needs more of your integration. So if you see what others don't dim it. Learn to hold it, hone it, share it wisely. If this resonated with you, Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more content that explores the deep, often hidden layers of consciousness and human potential.